December 1943. On the slopes of a mountain piercing the sky in the heart of Italy, thousands of young men were preparing for one of the bloodiest battles in history. They were British soldiers, thousands of miles from home, separated from their families, their loved ones, and the warmth of a cup of tea by the fireplace. And that night, on Christmas Eve, something would happen that no history book ever recorded. If you read the story I'm about to tell you in a movie script, you probably wouldn't believe it, because moments when two enemy sides lower their weapons and look at each other with humanity in the middle of the monster called war usually come from Hollywood's imagination. But this story is different. This story actually happened in the freezing Italian winter on the rock-hard soil of Monte Cassino. Watch this video until the end, because what I'm about to tell you is proof of how the human spirit can shine even in war's darkest moments. And trust me, by the end of this story, your eyes will be watering. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many videos like this on the channel, and new ones keep coming every day. So, if you've liked the video and subscribed, let's dive right in. But first, I want you to transport yourself to that night. Close your eyes and imagine. The final days of December 1943. Italy, famous for its mild Mediterranean climate, had a completely different atmosphere that winter. Temperatures had dropped below zero, and the wind cut right through to the bone. At the foot of Monte Cassino, in the shadow of the centuries-old monastery, thousands of British soldiers were shivering in their trenches. They wore wet uniforms, waterlogged boots, and held rifles frozen with ice. Who were these soldiers? They were factory boys from the working-class neighborhoods of London, young men who worked in Manchester's textile workshops, lads who carried cargo at Liverpool's docks, sons of fathers who sweated in Birmingham's steel factories. They were ordinary people who had left behind their homes, their families, and their dreams to stop Hitler from plunging Europe into darkness. But every single one of them was a hero. And now, on Christmas Eve, thousands of miles from home, they were living face to face with death. The conditions inside the trenches were indescribable. Mud was everywhere. Soldiers sunk up to their ankles in mud hadn't seen a dry sock in days. A condition called trench foot was spreading like an epidemic. Feet would swell, turn purple, and sometimes develop gangrene. Some soldiers lost their feet that winter, not just from enemy bullets, but from Italy's merciless cold. Tommy Atkinson, remember this name, a 22-year-old sergeant born in London. Before the war, he worked at a printing press in East London. His father was a First World War veteran who had left his left leg at the Somme. Tommy had grown up listening to his father's war stories, but no story could have prepared him for the reality of Monte Cassino, because that was simply impossible. That night, on Christmas Eve, Tommy was huddled in the corner of the trench, trying to light a cigarette with trembling hands. Next to him was his closest friend, William Harris. William, whom everyone called Billy, was a private from Manchester, 20 years old, with blonde hair and a freckled face. Before the war, he was an apprentice at a bakery, and even in the trench, he talked about the warmth of the bakery back home every chance he got. "Tommy," said Billy, his voice shaking, "tonight's Christmas Eve, isn't it?" Tommy nodded. He struggled to find words, because at that moment his mind was with his mother. The pudding his mother made on Christmas evenings, the Dickens stories his father read by the fireplace, the Christmas carols his sister played on the piano. They all seemed so distant, so unreachable. "My mum's probably put the turkey in the oven by now," said Billy, his eyes gazing into the distance. "Dad's probably opened the wine. Kate, my little sister, she's probably poking around at the presents under the tree." Tommy looked at his friend. There were tears in Billy's eyes, but he was trying to hide them. Men don't cry, especially soldiers. But that night, in that trench, everyone's eyes were wet. How could they not be? Silence hung over the trenches. Not a single sound came from the enemy lines. On normal nights, you'd hear the occasional rifle shot, a mine exploding, distant cannon fire. But that night, it was as if even the war had taken a break. And then, at that moment, something unexpected happened. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and like. Thank you. From the other side, from the German trenches, a faint melody began to rise. At first it was unclear, mixing with the howling wind, but slowly it became clearer. One voice, then two voices, then a chorus. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht. Silent night, holy night. Tommy froze. He gripped his rifle tightly but couldn't touch the trigger, because at that moment the sound rising from the enemy trenches reminded him of home. His mother hummed the same melody, the same song every Christmas evening, in a different language, but the same feeling. Billy had heard it too. So had the other soldiers around them. Everyone was listening in silence. No one moved, no one spoke, only that melody, that holy night song drifted through the freezing air. And then something even more unexpected happened. A voice rose from the British trenches. At first, just one voice, trembling and hesitant. Then another joined, then another. Silent night, holy night. All is calm, all is bright. Two enemy armies waiting to fire bullets at each other were singing the same song, in different languages, but with the same melody, with the same hope, the same longing. Tommy had closed his eyes. At that moment, there was no such thing as an enemy. There was no distinction between German and British. There were only people who missed their homes, missed their families, waiting for this damn war to end. When the song ended, there was a long silence. No one knew what to do. Then a voice was heard from the other side, in German. The words were hard to understand, but the tone was clear. It was a friendly tone. And then an English response came. From further down the trench, an officer had shouted, "Merry Christmas, Jerry!" Jerry, the nickname the British gave to German soldiers, but that night there was no insult in this name, just a greeting, an acknowledgement, a gesture of humanity. A response came from across, in accented English, "Merry Christmas, Tommy." Tommy, with the Germans called British soldiers, and that night this name too was not an insult but an expression of brotherhood. That night, at the foot of Monte Cassino, a ceasefire began that appears in no official records. The guns fell silent, hostility melted away, and humanity, if only for a moment, raised its head from the darkness of war. Let's pause here for a moment. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because the most dramatic parts of this story haven't come yet, and believe me, what I'll tell you next will deeply move you. Let's continue with what happened that night. After the songs ended, whispers began along the trenches. Soldiers looked at each other, discussing what to do. The officers were silent. Normally, in such a situation, an order to fire would be given, but that night, no officer gave that order. Maybe they too missed their homes. Maybe they too were tired of this meaningless war. And that was perfectly normal, because Tommy and Billy approached the edge of the trench. They looked across at the German trenches. In the darkness, they could see moving silhouettes. The enemy soldiers had also stood up and were looking at the British trenches. And then, a German soldier climbed out of the trench. Tommy's heart stopped. He reached for his weapon but couldn't draw it, because that soldier had raised his hands in the air, and he was holding something. It was hard to see in the dark, but it looked like a bottle. The soldier advanced into no man's land, the neutral territory between the two trenches. His steps were slow, cautious. He knew he could take a bullet at any moment, but he kept walking. A soldier next to Tommy raised his rifle, but Tommy grabbed his arm. "Wait," he said. "Just wait." When the German soldier reached the middle, he stopped. He raised the bottle in his hand and shouted, "Schnaps! Weihnachten! Christmas!" Schnapps, German liquor, and Christmas. At that moment, a British soldier emerged from the trenches. It wasn't Tommy, but someone he knew, Sergeant Reynolds, 40 years old, a battle-hardened man. He had a wife and 3 children in Leeds, and that night, perhaps thinking of his children, he left his weapon in the trench and walked into that no-man's land. The 2 soldiers met in the middle. The German soldier offered the bottle. Reynolds took it, had a sip, and handed it back. Then he pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and offered them to the German. Tommy couldn't believe his eyes watching this scene. This went against all the rules of war. This was fraternizing with the enemy. But at that moment, none of those rules mattered. Isn't it fascinating? Slowly, other soldiers began to emerge from the trenches too. First 1 or 2, then more. British and Germans met in that no-man's land. They shook hands, shared cigarettes, bottles passed from hand to hand. Billy had also left the trench. Tommy watched him. Billy was talking to a young German soldier. The 2 young men were probably the same age. Both had been dragged into this madness started by their elders without knowing what war really was. Tommy finally left the trench too. His steps were heavy. His heart was racing. In front of him were men he had been ready to kill just hours ago. But now, looking at them, he couldn't see enemies. He only saw people like himself, missing their homes, waiting for this war to end. A German soldier approached Tommy. He was a young man, maybe 20 years old. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He said something in German Tommy didn't understand, but then the soldier pulled a photograph from his pocket. In the photograph was a young woman and a small child. It must have been the soldier's wife and son. The man's eyes welled up as he showed the photograph. "Familia," he said. "Meine Familie." Family. My family. Tommy nodded. He too pulled a photograph from his pocket, a photo of his mother, father, and sister. It had been taken in London, in front of their house. "My family," said Tommy. 2 enemy soldiers looked at each other's family photographs, and at that moment, all the boundaries between them dissolved. German, British, enemy, ally, none of it mattered. They were both just 2 people who wanted to go home, who wanted to be reunited with their families. That night at the foot of Monte Cassino, the war stopped for a few hours. Soldiers chatted, drank, laughed. Someone pulled out a harmonica and played melodies. Someone else sang songs. Perhaps that night, in the middle of that bloody war, everyone became human for a few hours. But how long could this ceasefire last? When would the cruel reality of war return? And what would become of Tommy and that German soldier he had just met? I'll tell you that part of the story in the second part. But for now, let me say this. What happened that night doesn't appear in the pages of official history. No commander ordered this ceasefire, no general approved it. This was a miracle created by ordinary soldiers, ordinary people. And perhaps that's what makes this story so valuable. Because wars are the work of kings, generals, and politicians, but peace is born from the hearts of ordinary people. That night at Monte Cassino, a handful of British and German soldiers reminded us of that. We've come to the end of the first part. If you enjoyed this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. In the second part, I'll tell you about the most dramatic moments of that night and the unexpected developments. If you're ready, let's move on to part 2. Welcome back to part 2, everyone. We're continuing full speed ahead with our story. Let's return to where we left off in part 1. At the foot of Monte Cassino on Christmas Eve, songs rising from enemy trenches and the unexpected encounter that followed. British and German soldiers had put down their weapons and shaken hands in no man's land. Cigarettes were shared, drinks were had, family photographs were shown. But the story doesn't end here, because the most moving moments of that night hadn't happened yet. If you haven't watched part 1, stop now and watch it first, because to fully grasp this story, you need to follow it from the beginning. And if you have watched it, buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. The gathering in no man's land lasted about an hour. Soldiers chatted in groups, trying to communicate through gestures and expressions. Most British soldiers didn't know German. Most German soldiers didn't know English. But that night, the language barrier didn't matter at all. When people want to understand each other, words become unnecessary. Tommy Atkinson was still talking with the young German soldier he had met earlier. Actually, talking isn't the right word, because neither understood the other's language, but they had established a connection through hand gestures, facial expressions, and simple words. The German soldier's name was Hans Mueller, 21 years old, a private born in Munich. Before the war, he was a carpenter's apprentice. His father was a carpenter, his grandfather too. He came from a family that had worked in the same workshop for 3 generations, and now, thousands of miles from that workshop, he had been trained to spread death with a rifle in his hands. Hans pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden cross. He had made it himself before coming to Italy. He was going to give it to his mother as a gift, but he was deployed to the front before he could send it. Now he was offering this cross to Tommy. "For dich," said Hans, "for you." Tommy looked on in astonishment. This was a gift from an enemy soldier, in the middle of war, a symbol of friendship from the very man you called enemy. Tommy took the cross, turned it over in his hand, examined the craftsmanship. It was beautiful, elegant, and simple. "I can't take this," said Tommy. But Hans insisted. He placed his hand on his heart and then touched Tommy's heart. "Freunde," he said, "friends." Tommy's eyes welled up. Just hours ago they had been ready to kill each other, and now he was calling him friend. At that moment, Tommy understood how meaningless this war was better than anyone. He searched in his pocket, looking for something to give Hans. Finally, he found a coin his father had given him, a British penny from 1918. His father had brought this coin back from the First World War and carried it as a sort of good luck charm, and Tommy offered it to Hans. "For you," he said, "my father's lucky coin from the First War." Hans took the coin. He understood. The First World War, his father's. He knew how valuable this was. He bowed his head respectfully. "Danke," he said. "Thank you." 2 young men, on that freezing night, looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment a bond formed between them that words couldn't describe. They were no longer enemies. Perhaps one day, when this war was over, they could truly be friends. Meanwhile, Billy Harris was having his own adventure. Billy was sitting with a group of German soldiers sharing a bottle of schnapps. One of them, a man in his 30s with a mustache, could speak broken English. "I, in Berlin, waiter, before war. Many English tourists. Some English I learned." Billy smiled. "You were a waiter?" "I was a baker's apprentice in Manchester." "Manchester?" The German's eyes lit up. "Manchester United, football." Billy burst out laughing. In the middle of war, he was talking about football with a German soldier. What a crazy situation this was. Yes, Manchester United." Billy was excited. "Which team do you support?" "Hertha Berlin," said the German. "But now, no football. Only this." He gestured around. The trenches, the weapons, the war. Billy's joy faded instantly. Yes, this was all there was. This damn war, these meaningless deaths, this destruction. Football, normal life, it was all so far away. The German waiter pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a folded, worn piece of paper. He opened it and showed it to Billy. A child's drawing, a girl of 4 or 5, blonde hair, smiling. "Meine Tochter," said the man, his voice trembling. "My daughter, Greta, 4 years old. I haven't seen her in 12 months." Billy looked at the paper. It was a drawing the little girl had made: sun, house, flowers, and two human figures, probably the girl and her father. "Beautiful," said Billy. "A very beautiful drawing." "She sent this drawing in her last letter. She wrote, 'Daddy, come home.' But I can't go home. This war won't end." Billy didn't know what to say. He thought of his own family, his mother, his father, his little sister Kate. It had been 15 months since he left home. Kate had probably grown up. Maybe she wouldn't even recognize him anymore. "The war will end," said Billy, as if trying to convince himself. "It will end one day, and we'll all go home." The German nodded, but the expression in his eyes told how difficult that would be. How many of them would make it home? The slopes of Monte Cassino would soon be soaked in blood, and who knows how many would take their last breath on that red soil. In no man's land, another unexpected scene was unfolding. It had come to light that a British soldier was severely wounded. He had been injured in a mine explosion a few days earlier, but couldn't be evacuated. He was being treated in primitive conditions in the trench, but his condition was worsening. When the German soldiers heard this, one of them stepped forward, a middle-aged man with glasses. It turned out he had been a doctor before the war. He had performed surgery at a hospital in Stuttgart. Now he was fighting as an ordinary private in enemy ranks. If you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. "Ich bin Arzt," said the man. "I am a doctor. I can help." The British officers hesitated. Allowing an enemy doctor to touch their own soldiers? This went against all the rules of war. But the wounded soldier was on his deathbed, and perhaps this was his only chance. Finally, permission was granted. The German doctor entered the British trench. He examined the wounded soldier, inspected his wounds. He pulled supplies from the bag he had brought, and there, in an enemy trench, a German doctor fought to save the life of a British soldier. The operation took about an hour. The doctor removed the shrapnel from the soldier's wound, cleaned and dressed it. Infection had set in, but could be stopped. The soldier would live. When the operation was finished, the British soldier clutched the doctor's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. The German doctor smiled. "Ich bin Arzt," he said again. "I am a doctor. This is my duty. Enemy or not, it doesn't matter. A patient is a patient." This scene deeply affected everyone who was there that night. War divided people into enemies and allies, but some things transcended these divisions. Humanity, compassion, mercy. These didn't recognize uniforms. As the night wore on, the crowd in no man's land began to thin. Soldiers slowly returned to their trenches. Everyone knew this ceasefire wasn't permanent. When dawn broke, everything would return to normal. Guns would speak again. Hostility would resume. But that night, for a few hours, another reality had existed, and that reality would remain forever in the hearts of everyone who was there. When Tommy said goodbye to Hans, neither knew what to say. Tomorrow they would try to kill each other. Tonight they had become friends, but tomorrow they would be enemies. What a crazy, tragic situation this was. "Überlebe," said Hans. "Survive." Tommy nodded. "You too." They shook hands one last time, and then each returned to their own trenches. The distance between them was only a few hundred meters, but that distance now felt as deep as an ocean. Billy had also said goodbye to the German waiter. The man had given him the drawing his little daughter had made. "Keep this," he had said. "Maybe one day when this war is over, come to Berlin. I'll introduce you to Greta." Billy had taken the drawing and put it in his pocket. Could this promise be kept? When would this war end, and would both of them survive? The questions remained unanswered, because war didn't ask questions, it only took. It took lives, dreams, hopes. and Monte Cassino would soon take much. Let's take a short break here. If you're enjoying this video and think others should hear this untold story of Monte Cassino, please hit the like button and share the video, because these stories shouldn't be forgotten. The sacrifice, courage, and humanity of these people should be remembered. Now let's get to what happened after that night. What do you think happened after that night? When dawn broke, everything changed. The magic that had existed throughout the night melted away with the first light of morning. Officers gave orders, soldiers took positions, weapons were cleaned again, bullets were chambered. War had returned. The first gunshot was heard at 7 in the morning. A German sniper had opened fire on the British trenches. The bullet hit the edge of the trench. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The ceasefire was over. Tommy would struggle to describe what he felt at that moment, even years later. The men he had shaken hands with last night were now trying to kill him. And he might have to kill Hans. This thought made his stomach turn. But war didn't care about feelings. Orders came and were carried out. British artillery opened fire. German positions were bombed. The Germans returned fire. British trenches shook, and suddenly all the peace of that holy night was drowned in the noise of war. That day, 3 casualties were taken on the British side. Young soldiers who had sung songs last night, shared drinks, shown family photographs. Now their lifeless bodies lay in the trenches. War continued as if it had never stopped. There were probably casualties on the German side too, but Tommy never found out. Had Hans survived? Was that German doctor alive? Would the waiter Billy had met be able to return to his little daughter? These questions remained unanswered. Days passed. Christmas was forgotten. The new year came, and in January 1944, the Battle of Monte Cassino officially began. Monte Cassino. This name remained a dark page in World War II history. 4 separate assaults, 4 months of fighting, tens of thousands of casualties. That monastery hill in the heart of Italy became one of the bloodiest battlefields in the world. British soldiers stormed the gates of hell climbing that mountain. The German defense was a wall of steel. Every meter of progress was paid in blood. A separate battle was fought on every hill, every rock, every trench. Tommy was on the front lines in all of these battles. For 4 months, he danced with death. He lost friends beside him, killed his enemies, and every night, huddled in the trench, he thought of that Christmas night, of Hans, the wooden cross he had given him, of how he had said, "Friends." Don't forget to subscribe and like for this story. That cross stayed in Tommy's pocket. Throughout the entire battle, he never parted with it. He carried it like a talisman, a protective force, and perhaps that cross truly protected him, because Tommy was one of the rare soldiers to emerge from Monte Cassino alive. Billy Harris wasn't so lucky. In mid-February, during the Second Battle of Monte Cassino, Billy's unit suffered heavy casualties. German machine guns mowed down British soldiers. Billy was shot while trying to take cover in a trench. The bullet hit his chest. Tommy ran to Billy's side, but it was too late. Billy's eyes were open, but his gaze was empty. The baker's apprentice from Manchester took his last breath on Italy's rocky soil. Tommy searched through his friend's pocket, and there he found the drawing the German waiter had given him, the drawing little Greta had made: sun, house, flowers, and 2 human figures. The drawing was stained with blood, Billy's blood. Tommy took the drawing and put it in his pocket. This drawing would be Billy's memorial, and maybe one day when this war was over, he would go to Berlin and find Greta. He would tell her Billy's story. The Battle of Monte Cassino ended in May 1944. The Allies finally won, but the cost was heavy. Tens of thousands of soldiers lost their lives. British, Americans, Poles, New Zealanders, Indians, South Africans, people from all corners of the world shed their blood at the foot of that mountain. And the Germans? They also suffered tens of thousands of casualties. Maybe Hans was among them. Maybe that German doctor, too. Maybe the waiter from Berlin. Tommy never found out. War only took. It didn't give answers. Now let's think about the true meaning of that Christmas night. What happened that night at Monte Cassino was never recorded in official documents. No general ordered this ceasefire. No politician approved it. It was a spontaneous moment of peace created by ordinary soldiers. And perhaps that's what makes it so valuable. Because that night proved that light can exist even in humanity's darkest hours. It reminded us that the people we call enemies are just like us, that they have families, dreams, fears. And perhaps most importantly, it showed the true face of war. War isn't just the business of generals drawing arrows on maps. War is a monster that takes the lives of ordinary people like Tommy, like Billy, like Hans. And that monster can be stopped. At least for one night, for a few hours, it can be stopped, if people want it. That Christmas night at Monte Cassino, a handful of soldiers wanted it, and they succeeded. Tommy Atkinson returned to London after the war. He got married, had children, saw his grandchildren, but until the day he died, he never forgot that night. He kept the wooden cross Hans had given him in the drawer of his bedroom, and from time to time he would hold that cross and think of that night. What happened to Hans? Tommy never found out. Maybe he died in the war. Maybe he survived. Maybe he returned to Munich, continued carpentry. Maybe he too remembered that night. Maybe he too kept the British penny Tommy had given him. This uncertainty is perhaps the most painful part of the story. War brings people together and then ruthlessly tears them apart, and it leaves behind unanswered questions. But we know one thing: that night at Monte Cassino, humanity won. Only for a few hours, but it won. And this victory was never rewarded with any medal, never written in any history book. But perhaps it was one of history's greatest victories. We've come to the end of part 2, but the story isn't over yet. In the third and final part, I'll tell you about the legacy of this story that extends to today. How did Tommy's grandchildren learn this story? And what does this story tell us today? Don't miss part 3, because the finale will deeply move you. If you're curious about the final part, subscribe and like. We're continuing. We're continuing with the final part. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, stop now and watch them first, because this finale will only make sense if you know the whole story. And believe me, what I'll tell you in this final part will deeply move you. Tommy Atkinson was one of the lucky soldiers who returned alive from Monte Cassino. But lucky might not be the right word, because every soldier who returned from war brought back invisible wounds. Physical wounds could heal, but the wounds opened in the soul bled for a lifetime, and that was very painful, of course. In May 1945, with Germany's surrender, Tommy was finally able to return home, to London, to his family, to that normal life he had missed so much. But the home he returned to was the same home. His family was the same family. What had changed was Tommy himself. The years after the war were like hell for Tommy. He couldn't sleep at night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bloody slopes of Monte Cassino, Billy's lifeless body, the screams in the trenches, the deafening roar of artillery shells. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, struggling to remember where he was. Elizabeth, Tommy's wife, watched helplessly as her husband suffered. When they first met, Tommy was a cheerful young man. His eyes sparkled. He looked at life with hope. But the man who returned from war seemed like someone else. There was a darkness in his eyes. His smile came forced. Sometimes he would stare out the window for hours without saying anything. Today, we call this post-traumatic stress disorder. But back then, there was no such definition. Soldiers were just said to be suffering from battle fatigue, and they were expected to suffer in silence. Men don't cry. Men don't show weakness. Men don't pour out their feelings. These rules condemned thousands of war veterans to silent torture. Tommy found a way to cope with this pain. He started writing. He bought a small notebook, black-covered with thick pages, and on nights when he couldn't sleep, he wrote his memories in that notebook. Monte Cassino, Billy, his friends in the trenches, those he had lost, and most of all, that Christmas night. The longest section of that notebook was devoted to that Christmas night. Meeting Hans, the wooden cross, the handshake, the songs, the gathering in no man's land. Tommy wrote trying to remember every detail. The German doctor treating the British soldier, Billy talking about football with the waiter, Hans showing his family photograph. These memories were the only light he saw in the darkness of war. That night he had seen that humanity still existed. He had understood that the men he called enemies were also human, and this understanding kept him alive. Years passed. Tommy's nightmares decreased, though they never completely went away. He continued with his life. He returned to printing, started his own business, became successful. He and Elizabeth had a happy marriage. 3 children were born, 2 boys and a girl. They bought a nice house in the suburbs of London, grew roses in the garden. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. From the outside, Tommy was a perfect British citizen, war hero, successful businessman, loving family man. But inside, the traces of Monte Cassino never faded. That notebook stayed in the drawer of his bedroom, and from time to time, Tommy would take it out and read the old pages. He rarely talked to his children about the war. He would only tell general things, dangerous moments, funny anecdotes, soldier friendships. But he never told them about that Christmas night. This story was too personal, too sacred. It couldn't be put into words. And perhaps if Tommy told this story, emotions he couldn't control would surface. The wooden cross Hans had given him was Tommy's most precious treasure. He kept it in a special box in his bedroom drawer. Sometimes, when he was alone, he would hold that cross and look at it for a long time, and he would think of Hans. Had he survived the war? Had he been able to return to Munich? Had he continued carpentry? These questions remained unanswered for years. Tommy had tried to find Hans after the war ended. He had written letters to Munich, asked veterans associations, but he couldn't find any trace. War had turned millions of lives upside down. People had disappeared. Families had scattered. Records had been destroyed. Finding a man named Hans Mueller was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Until 1984, Tommy never told this story to anyone. That year, Tommy was 73 years old. He had retired and was spending time with his grandchildren. He was in the autumn of his life, but still standing tall. Every morning he would walk in the garden, read his newspaper, have tea with Elizabeth. One day, his eldest grandson James came to visit. James was 14 years old, a young man with curious eyes. They were studying World War II in history class at school, and their teacher had given them an assignment to interview war veterans and their families. James had grabbed his notebook and pen and run to his grandfather's house. Tommy Atkinson had fought on the Italian front in World War II. This was going to be a great interview. Tommy hesitated at first. Talking about the war meant reopening old wounds, but the curiosity in James's eyes softened him, and perhaps the time had come to tell this story. "All right," said Tommy, "but this is a long story. Get your tea and sit somewhere comfortable." And that day, for the first time, Tommy told the story of that Christmas night, from beginning to end, in every detail. Hans, the wooden cross, the songs, the handshake, the German doctor, Billy meeting the waiter. He told it all. James listened as if spellbound. He had even forgotten to take notes in his notebook. This story wasn't written in any history book. Celebrating Christmas with the enemy, singing songs, exchanging gifts. This was a story that seemed to come from the movies. "Grandpa," said James, his voice trembling, "why doesn't anyone know this story?" Tommy looked at his grandson with a sad smile. "Because no one wrote it down, son. It's not in official records. Officers didn't report it. Generals didn't know. Only those of us who were there know. And most of us are no longer alive." "What happened to Hans?" asked James. "Did you ever find him?" Tommy shook his head. "No. I tried to find him after the war. I wrote letters, asked associations, but I couldn't find any trace. Maybe he died in the war. Maybe he survived, but never looked for me. I don't know. And not knowing is the most painful part." James saw the longing in his grandfather's eyes. 40 years had passed, but Tommy still remembered that Christmas night as if it were yesterday, and he still wondered about Hans' fate. After that conversation, James made a decision. When he grew up, he would become a historian, and he would tell his grandfather's story to the world. This story should not be forgotten. The sacrifice of these people should be remembered. James really did become a historian. He studied history at Cambridge University, specializing in World War II. He wrote his doctoral thesis on unofficial ceasefires on the Italian front, and over the years he researched that Christmas night at Monte Cassino. He scoured archives, read the memoirs of old soldiers, interviewed survivors. He went everywhere, from London to Rome, Washington to Berlin. He followed every lead, recorded every testimony. What he found surprised him. Tommy's story wasn't unique. At Monte Cassino, and indeed across the entire Italian front, similar stories had occurred. Soldiers, outside of official orders, had declared brief ceasefires among themselves. Pauses to collect the wounded, breaks for burials, silent agreements on Christmas and New Year's nights. These stories hadn't made it into official records because fraternizing with the enemy was a military offense. Soldiers could be punished. So everyone had stayed silent, and these stories had disappeared one by one along with the survivors. James's research brought these lost stories to light. After 20 years of work, he wrote a book about the moments of humanity at Monte Cassino. The book received attention in academic circles and won awards. Isn't this a very valuable story? But Tommy didn't live to see that book published. In 1998, at 87 years old, he died peacefully, holding Elizabeth's hand in his own bed without suffering. A few days before he died, Tommy had called for his grandson. James sat by his grandfather's bedside. Tommy's voice was weak, but his eyes still sparkled. "James," said Tommy, "I'm going to give you something." With trembling hands, he pulled out a box from under his pillow. Inside the box was Hans's wooden cross. "Keep this," said Tommy, "and one day, if you find Hans's family, give it to them. Tell them that Tommy never forgot him." That night, we both stopped being enemies and became human, and this humanity is stronger than death itself. James took the cross, tears streaming down his face, and he made a promise to his grandfather. He would find Hans's family, no matter how long it took. Tommy died 3 days later. Hundreds of people attended his funeral. Family, friends, former colleagues, war veterans. Everyone bid farewell to Tommy Atkinson with love and respect. But for James, his grandfather's legacy wasn't yet complete. Finding Hans Mueller was now a mission. In 2015, James's book was translated into German. A German publishing house had shown interest in the Monte Cassino stories and published the book. The book resonated in Germany as well, because Germans too were searching for the stories of their own grandfathers and fathers. And one day, James received a letter from Munich. The letter was written by a 65-year-old woman. Her name was Ingrid Mueller, and her father was Hans Mueller. James's hands trembled as he read the letter. The answer he had been searching for years had finally come. Ingrid's letter told everything. Hans had survived Monte Cassino. In March 1944, he had been severely wounded when a piece of shrapnel hit his leg. This wound had taken him out of combat. He had been sent to Germany, treated in a hospital, and spent the rest of the war there. After the war ended, Hans had returned to Munich. His leg limped, but he could work. He had continued carpentry, taking over his father's workshop. He had married and had 3 children. And in 1987, at 75 years old, he had died. But until the day he died, he never forgot that Christmas night. Ingrid wrote that her father would constantly tell the story of that night, that he had met a British soldier, given him a wooden cross, received a coin in return, and that the Englishman's name was Tommy. Hans had kept that coin until the day he died. Now that coin was with Ingrid. When James finished the letter, he was crying. His grandfather and Hans both had never forgotten each other. Both had remembered that night. Both had kept that brief encounter alive in their hearts. In the spring of 2016, James went to Munich. He met with Ingrid. The two sat in a cafe and talked for hours. James told Tommy's story. Ingrid told Hans's story. And the two stories, after more than 70 years, finally came together. At the end of the meeting, a historic moment occurred. James pulled Hans's wooden cross from his pocket. Ingrid pulled Tommy's 1918 penny from her bag. 2 generations later, 2 families completed the unfinished story of their grandfathers. The cross and the coin changed owners. Now these were no longer just objects. They were symbols of the bond between 2 countries, 2 families, 2 people. What does this story teach us? Wars are the work of politicians and generals, but peace is born from the hearts of ordinary people. This is a very important statement. Please understand it well. Tommy and Hans couldn't stop the war, but that night they created a peace between themselves, and this peace lived on through generations. The people we call enemies are no different from us. They too have families, dreams, fears. Uniforms may be different, flags may be different, but underneath we are all human. And no night is so dark that a light cannot be lit. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. In our next video, we'll tell an unforgettable story experienced by American soldiers on the Pacific Front. Believe me, that story will also shake you to your core. See you soon. And remember, even in the darkest nights, the light of humanity shines. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.